Hello, 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 everybody. Jerry, the East Coast Viking here with my good friend Jonathan Pisher of Apex Counseling. If you're listening to this live or just in general, happy Veterans Day to everybody out there who served or has family who has as well. But coming at you, I said like we're it's still technically fall, but we're 1 week into daylight savings time here in the U.S., with just making it darker even earlier now. Like you might even be eating lunch and it seems like it's getting dark all of a sudden, which ties in very appropriately to today's topic, seasonal affective disorder. Now, JP, this is one we've talked about for months in terms of like coming up. That this is definitely one we want to do. And like right before this, of course, you said you were excited for this one, had a lot to go in. And I know, like personally, this one's affected you as well, and you've come up with a lot of different things there to help you like just get through these dark times in the sense of literal darkness.
It's very theatrical, but technically accurate.
Yeah, through these actual longer night times. But I'll go and let you get in a little bit here because I said that I know this one's right up your alley.
Yeah, some people know they're impacted by this, and a lot of people don't necessarily. But if in case you do not know what this is, seasonal affective disorder is when, as the daylight starts to shorten, people's moods start to become a problem. People start to have difficulty with more depressive episodes, sometimes higher anxiety. And a lot of it has to do with the changes that occur when the days shorten. There's some neurochemistry that is different. But for the people who struggle with seasonal affective disorder, there's a lot of other things besides just the chemistry aspect that are worth looking into. And the nice thing about this is, if you're impacted by seasonal affective disorder, you almost never need a great deal of psychotherapy to help with it. This is a thing that you can really help yourself a lot with if you know how to experiment properly, because there's no one size fits all solution, but there's a lot of very simple fixes to experiment with to see what you can do to help yourself with seasonal affective disorder.
Now
Uh,
I'm curious, do you feel like do people know about this more now than maybe they did 20 years ago?
yeah, this is well known. That's kind of why I made space for some people to not know about it, but I'm very ready for many of the people watching this to at least have an idea what this is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious. I mean, this is also like because I'm curious because this is the nerd part of me coming out. Like with the chemistry portion of it. But I mean, does this go back in like the teachings or history of counseling and therapy? I mean, like to the beginning. Like, is this something that's been documented from the beginning of it, or is this
Probably. I
recognized
mean,
as
I mean,
something
it's
new?
documented even before there was such a thing as like the field of psychotherapy, because honestly, you can look at any sort of historical documents that reference anything that sounds like cabin fever. You've heard the term cabin
Oh
fever.
yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, what that's referencing is during the wintertime, people were holed up inside of their homes because there wasn't much to do, there wasn't anywhere to go. And if you live on the frontier, or you live anywhere besides in a big city, you were basically stuck indoors for anywhere between 3 to 6 months, depending on how bad the winter was. So this has existed forever, and people have known about it. And like everything, we just didn't have fancy names for it. It's like
Right.
PTSD. They used to call it shell shock, seasonal affective disorder. They used to call it cabin fever, and probably several other things that I don't happen to
Right.
recall the name of.
Yeah. Very cool. So I just love connecting those dots, learning about that type of stuff. So
Yeah.
So, what are the most common ways that you see this manifest itself in people?
Largely depressive type symptoms. So people will feel just like low mood. They'll feel low energy. They'll be less productive. And most people, it's significant, but it's not like horribly detrimental. You don't generally have a non-suicidal person moving into suicidality from
Mm,
seasonal affective disorder, unless they were right on the brink of it from some other depression or something anyway. But it can easily make the symptoms of anything you're experiencing worse if you're If your love relationship is having trouble and you get seasonal affective disorder, you can have much more difficulty in your love relationship, much more anxiety if you're an anxious person. So it definitely has an impact on the other more serious issues in your life, which is why it's well worth trying to figure out some ways to treat.
Yeah, that's a great way to distinguish that. I'm glad you did that with like I said, like with the difference of saying that if you don't have any major issues, quote unquote, like with depression right now, like I said, it's just going to be more than likely just a mood change, energy change. But yeah, pointing out that if you are fighting any form of just difficult issues right now, then it can definitely make those things worse.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of like, yeah, it just seems like your entire, I don't know why the word miasma is coming in my head. That's not, but it's almost like
That's not a bad word
you're
for
almost
this.
in a
Yeah.
miasma of just like, yeah, just things being a little bit more blah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I know a big part of it. I mean, at least for me, non-professional in this, I feel like always notice this, like so many people, the way we noticed it is just in that issue, just in that annoyance, frustration of when it seems like if we just get off school/work and there's only like an hour or two of daylight left. And that's, like I said, because we are inside for those hours, we're doing the things we're supposed to do / we have to do under a normal schedule. And then it suddenly seems like that takes the whole daylight and there just is nothing left with that.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I find helpful to do with people, like so if I'm walking through this in a slow, careful way in the clinical setting, is giving people a distinction between I call it two types of seasonal affective disorder. That's not technically accurate, but it's a useful way of looking at it. And so one of the things that I encourage people to think about is, okay, do you have actual neurochemical seasonal affective disorder, or do you have behavioral seasonal affective disorder? Or do you have both? Because most people will frankly have both, but it helps to figure out which thing you need to focus on more. Because if we think about something, let's imagine somebody had no trouble with their neurochemistry out of increased hours of darkness. But let's also imagine that there may be, they're like an outdoorsy person. They play some sports. But if you are a person who you get most of your fun needs met through, I don't know, rock climbing, beach volleyball, and swimming in the lake, and then suddenly it's wintertime, those all disappear. And what that means is that if you get all of your social needs met and your fun needs met through that, and that all disappears for 6 months, neurochemistry aside, what happens to you? You're going to feel worse. And so a lot of times it's useful to kind of distinguish between the two drivers of this. There's the neurochemistry driver, and then there's the behavioral driver, where some people don't realize that you can't just cut off the things that meet your needs for a few months and expect to feel good.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Like separating it that way. So, do you normally find that like is this type of thing that do people like ask for help or bring this up or question what's going on with them? Quote, or is this something more that's like they may just be talking about things and seemingly stuck in a rut type of sensation, and then you can kind of like point it out if you know the signs you're looking for.
Almost always number two, and usually somebody will have at least enough insight to say, God, why do I feel so crappy in the winter? Like we're working on their other stuff, and they'll say something like that, and we get into, well, here's exactly why, and here's some ways you can start to self-experiment to combat that. Because of course, if you're talking to me, we're already working on something else anyway, and we don't want it negatively impacting the disorder that we're treating.
Okay. So really for the behavioral one, I mean, it really gives you just one more reason why, for example, trying to find more hobbies / social circles, activities for you to do like different times of the year isn't just simply a suggestion to kill time or meet more people. It can actually be something to keep your mood stable throughout the whole, like your mood and your disposition stable through the year, through the different seasons. I mean, I never would have thought about that, to be honest. Like it would have just seemed like especially because I'm one of those people, like, we weren't a sporty family growing up, for example, but even with that case, that's still one of the earliest ways that I probably grew up thinking of seasons
Hmm.
was what sport is played during what season. It just was an easy connection to make, you know, and
Yeah.
it's all around. And never thought about that as just one potential, way to kind of like actually um, help your sustain your mood.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, you'll notice I said there's a lot of non-obvious ways this can present itself because let's take a friend of mine. There's a friend of mine that does a lot of drag racing. He probably enters, I don't know, 6, 8 races over the course of a year. And we've talked about psychological needs: belonging, fun, freedom, and power. Well, name me one of those needs that drag racing doesn't hit. But how much does that happen during the winter? None, because you can't drag race on ice. And so it seems like, well, I only do this 6 or 8 times a year, so this shouldn't impact my mood if it's gone for a few months. But that's oftentimes not the way the brain works. And so
Mhm.
sometimes it's almost like not very obvious that getting rid of this thing that only happens a few times a year, but you have a massive gap in between them, can actually like be the behavioral side of seasonal affective disorder. So one of the things I often encourage people to think hard about is ways to replicate things. So that first thing I said is, imagine we got somebody who's like an outdoorsy person. Maybe they do a lot of rock climbing. Well, now that's easy here in our town. We have a rock climbing gym. Like we have
Mhm.
literally a 2-story gym that is all about rock climbing. So it's a little easier to replicate now. But for a lot of people, how do you replicate um, whitewater kayaking? Like
Yeah.
I don't know how to replicate that indoors.
Yeah. They have it.
But
I mean, you're talking Olympic level facilities.
well, yeah, if you got a ton of money, you can replicate it. But
That's right.
uh, but one of the things you notice how at least every second or third podcast, the psychological needs come up, right? If you
Mhm.
know what needs something hits, then you can say, well, okay, if I'm having a deficit in my fun, freedom, and power need, what else can I do that'll hit that? But I can do it indoors, or I can do it during this season, or I can fill in the blank. And that's a decent way to start trying to replicate things. Happily, all my stuff seems to be indoor year round available, so I don't have to do that part. I just have to address the neurochemistry part. But there's a lot of people who they really have to address the behavioral part.
Yeah, like almost everything I would have thought of before this conversation would have been neurochemical, which
Yeah,
is
and,
again,
and there's a lot of that. That's still really important. I'm just hitting this first because it's the less obvious.
right. Yeah. So I really wouldn't have thought about that at all. And okay, so I mean, other like okay, so find looking for new activities or like said
Mhm.
something like that. And like you said, taking this like not just new activities per se, but if you can make it a little bit more specific and find the ones that you're missing activities we're hitting. So I mean, you said that's one great tactic and strategy to try to get involved in something else. What would be another one for somebody who suffers through this?
So this is where it now starts to become person specific. Because if we have the rock climber who doesn't have access to that, then we have to figure out like, okay, what can hit that? And oftentimes there's a lot of self experimentation that has to go into it. So like if we take the rock climber and we say, okay, well, we don't know what else will hit these needs well. So let's say this 2 weeks you're going to try this thing. The next 2 weeks you're going to try this thing, and see what impact it has. This is a great opportunity also to try new things you've always been wanting to try, because now you have a much better excuse. Now it's medically necessary for your mood and your productivity. So it helps people like try something that's got a little novelty. Uh, but one of the pitfalls that people will do is they'll accidentally replace the one thing with something that is really not useful to them at all in terms of hitting the same things. So let's take our beach volleyball athlete who doesn't have access to that for 6 months. Okay, what are you going to do in your spare time to have fun? Watch Netflix. Those two things
I'm
don't
gonna catch up
really.
with all my shows.
Yeah, and that does work for some people. Like some people, actually, that shift works fine. But what most people fail to do, and here's the thing for the person trying to figure this out. Here's what to do is, okay, I replace this with this, and it doesn't seem to be working. So what now do I try instead of that? So okay, Netflix isn't working to replace my beach volleyball. So let me try racquetball. That's an indoor sport. Maybe that'll be closer. Or maybe that's no good. That's why the self experimentation piece starts to become important. Uh, sometimes you're not losing. Sometimes it's not about losing an athletic activity or a type of activity. Sometimes it's about losing the social aspect of it. So if beach volleyball is where I see all my friends, but I can just go see all my friends and have like dinner with them once a week, maybe that's the actual replacement. Maybe that's the behavioral hack. So that's why committing to self experimentation is so important. And I mean, I've been experimenting on my own seasonal affective disorder for, let's just say, at least 6 years by now, probably longer. And I definitely don't have my formula right, but it's pretty good. My formula is now
Yeah.
pretty good.
I think like this is normally a period of time where we're in the 2 months right now where gym usage tends to slow down a lot. That changes at most gyms with the New Year's, but right now it tends to slow down a lot, like November, holiday season. And I feel like that would actually be for anybody who does have a lot of outdoor, more summersy daylight type activities. I feel like that, I mean, that right there would be a good spot for a lot of them, especially if it does have some of the same people or the same type of people they would see, even if it's not like, just to run with that same example, even if it's not the same beach volleyball athletes or beach volleyball at all, or even if it's not drag racers, if it's just simply got people in there who are also in competitive activities, there's that kind of like, just that in itself is a little social connection. And, I speak of that definitely coming from my gym where we have tons of different people who play different sports.
Your gym has more social connection than any other gym I've seen ever.
Yes. That's awesome. But yeah, exactly. Like it's different type, different athletes, different age groups, different schools, all that stuff. But I feel like it's a big part of it. And and a lot of times that's like it's cool to see those connections happen and cheer each other. But yeah, like I feel like that could be a big one, is just because there is definitely something different between being at a gym. It's two different experiences, and neither one's wrong, of course. But being at a gym to just do your work, you have headphones on. Example, like just there to do the work, and that one, for example, could still help, but especially in the neurochemical one we'll talk about soon. But then it's a different, you could do the exact same workout, everything like that, exact same gym. But if it's also meant to be a more social experience, and I don't necessarily mean like you're talking, like you're spending all this time talking. I don't mean like not that it would be necessarily, but I don't mean like a wasting time social experience, but I mean simply one where you actually talk to other people while you're there, you're involved, maybe you do have some good conversations going with people, like developing actual relationships. Those are two completely different type of workout experiences, even if the workout is exactly the same.
Yeah.
Um, so
Now, before we move on to neurochemistry, there's a good pitfall to point out to people that really, it doesn't drive seasonal affective disorder, but it definitely makes things harder. Because if you think about our entry into the period where days are shorter and nights are longer, you got something else that is present during that time, which is the holiday season, Thanksgiving, Christmas, et al. Uh, and one of the things that can, if we think of the behavioral side of this, psychological needs, belonging, fun, freedom, and power. A lot of people accidentally use the holidays to really wreck their psychological needs. They'll be around people who are more toxic for them, oftentimes family members. If you've got family members that are somewhat toxic to you, they'll turn the holidays into a giant checklist instead of using them for rest and recuperation, so it damages the fun need. So one of the things is people can accidentally set themselves a bad pace for the winter for this simply by entering into this season like with some vulnerabilities by treating the holidays in a way that's not particularly helpful to them. So if I was going to encourage people to avoid a pitfall around this behaviorally, also be very conscientious of how you are handling the holidays, because since that's the entry into this season, that sets the pace and the tone for how the rest of it goes.
Yeah. I actually had written down right here. Now, these aren't quite that, but they are related to related to that type of season, especially one of them. Slightly cheating in terms of seasonal affective disorder, but I was wondering, one, about people who go into it. We're looking at the behavioral one, but part of theirs is that they're going into it alone. So whether they had, so again, we're not talking purely seasonal here, and I recognize that, but nevertheless, you have that reminders that you're going into the holidays, reminders of that period, and maybe you're alone through, you just don't have people left anymore, or maybe it's been breakups, divorces, bad relationships, fights, whatever. And another one, like business people who this is a slowdown period. I'm curious. I would be kind of curious about that if you've ever come across really those people or had those conversations where this is a really stressful time for some business owners or just employees, and like things that might help them just kind of deal with that depression they may have.
Yeah, I think if I was going to offer any one thing that doesn't turn into its own whole separate topic, right?
Right, yeah, I feel like it could.
It would be that no matter what, just assume you are going to have a drop in productivity. Because a lot of people make up this idea. Uh, so I don't know if you've ever done this, but many people do this. You ever notice that when you plan out the amount of time it takes to get somewhere, you kind of instinctively know what that time would be with all green lights and no traffic? But
Right.
then if you like hit red lights and traffic, like you tend to get annoyed and irritated. And
Oh yeah. Yep.
so the similar thing can happen with our productivity. When we think about how productive we should be, we will accidentally look at our maximum productivity period and say it should be like this all of the time. And that is not true. That is, even take the seasons out of it, and it's not true. Put the seasons in, and it's way not true. A lot of people accidentally make up that they should be exactly as productive, dead in the middle of the Christmas season as they are in high summer, and that's not true. The thing a business owner or an executive or some other like highly success oriented person could do for themselves to not wreck themselves is build in the assumption that you are going to be 15% less productive, 20% less productive, and operate off of that instead of beating the ever loving hell out of yourself for not being as maximally productive as you are in high summer.
I think too, another one that would help is this is one of those places where if you recognize that a lot of what you do see results wise now, so we are talking about business, a lot of it may be built on groundwork that you may, laid down 60, 90 days ago. So kind of like one of those things where if you can set the systems up a little bit earlier to try to take you through this part in the slow period. I know that's true because, like, ironically, like our gym doesn't really function this way, since we function more based on like our trends are more based on sports seasons and when they end. But like I said, since I mentioned for a lot of gyms, these are slower time periods. Gym owners, have those months of July, August, September, etc., to really try to lay down groundwork to make this part, either so they have extra cash laying around, or to minimize to lower expenses, or just simply pushes that they have found worked to bolster memberships in business this time frame when otherwise it might be a slower period. So if you lay in the work ahead of time, that can definitely help, or just work aimed at addressing that issue is what I should say. So yeah, looking at the neurochemical one. Let's like this one's definitely a big one. I would say, okay, so top is like I mean, since we are talking literally about sunlight here, for
Mhm.
a big part of it and not having as much of it, is I think people are less aware now of the importance that sunlight actually plays in their life and in their health. They might know it. Like I feel like they said they're more aware of things like seasonal affective disorder, but I feel like they're less intuitively understanding of how healthy sunlight is. Because I mean it is getting pushed as less important to daily life. And I feel like a lot of people just don't have that connection anymore of how important it really is. Like
Mhm.
for a long time, and I mean, as far as we know from the very beginning up until at least the 70s, maybe later, there was a very strong message out there of like get sunlight. And then that message started to fade
Yeah.
or get lost in the
Al-
noise.
al- Although to be fair, sunlight is a little more dangerous than it was 50 years ago on account of
I mean, that's true.
yeah, the ozone and stuff. But yes, you are absolutely right that people and I love exactly what you said because it's right. People know about seasonal affective disorder, and yet many people also don't put together easily that yes, that means that sunlight is important in daily life. Uh, we compartmentalize everything. We're so used to being specialists and specialized in everything that we no longer view things as systems quite as easily. So yeah, all of that to say you're right. I think that's true.
Yeah, and I mean, because I mean, I know a big one is vitamin D. You get
Mhm.
that. Um, Circadian rhythms are another one. Like we're actually there's a enormous uptick in healthy sleep patterns and people who get sunlight into their eyeballs as soon as they wake up as possible. Like they have
Mhm.
much healthier sleep patterns if you get sunlight within 10, 15, 20 minutes of waking up rather those who wait a few hours.
Really?
Because it
Never read that.
Yeah, yeah, because it's basically it's connecting to your natural circadian rhythm. As soon as you get that natural blue light from the sun at the angles when it presents as close to dawn as close to like sunrise as possible, it communicates that to your circadian rhythm systems as hey, we're waking up at this time and helps set those patterns up so you sleep better and wake up better. Um,
That's an interesting proposition because it suggests that being a member of the 4 a.m. club is unhealthy.
So right, or at least step outside, yeah, something like that. Um, but yeah, and actually, and it's crazy is that the amount of blue light is that comes from a book called a book called Sleep Smarter. But I remember saying like the amount of blue light that is absorbed by your corneas is crazy different if you go from like contact lenses or glasses or just your bare eyeballs, which just makes sense in terms
Huh.
of how like each one just allowing more blue light. But in general, just getting outside and getting some early on is better than not.
Yeah, if you got that sitting around, you'll have to let me borrow that because that's an item I've never read. Although the thing, as I go further and further into my field and into my career, the thing I am for sure learning is that for every one thing we learn about how neurobiology works, it suggests five more questions
Oh,
because the
sure.
thing we learned doesn't make any damn sense.
Right. I'm sure, and yeah, that one's actually at the one. It should be in the bookcases at the gym. So I'll definitely be able to get that to you.
Yeah.
Mm.
But now the thing that you're talking about is one of the things that's most well known, which is that neurochemically, the easiest thing to do is get as much sunlight as possible. Which, if you work anything resembling a 9 to 5 job, means you are stuck inside under fluorescent lights for exactly the hours that the stupid sun is in the sky. Uh,
Mhm.
so, uh, building around that as much as you can is useful. If you have days off, then trying to get sunlight on your days off. If you can be outside some, even if it's just taking a walk. Uh, the the research on this is not as clear as I wish it was, but it certainly seems like getting as much skin and eye exposure is as possible is what's useful. So the more exposed skin you can have while you're getting your sunlight, the better. So obviously, like I have like the solar dome here. So just naturally, if I walk without a hat on, I get a little more sun exposure than some people. But if you wear a short sleeve shirt for a little extra sun exposure, you can go the full Mauser method and wear shorts and flip flops. But just sucking up as much sun as possible is one of the frontline ways to help yourself a lot where possible. I mean, frankly, I understand it's not as possible as we would wish, which is why we have the entire problem in the first place. But if you're going to try and address it neurochemically, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, and then it's depending on the weather. I mean, we've had some. October was colder than November so far for us. So yeah, but if it's when you do start getting down into the 40s, 30s, and below, being outside and having skin exposed at the same time, it may not be the greatest idea or feasible. So it makes it even harder.
Yeah. Now, there's a thing I love to do during the snowy season, which is if it snows and then you get that wonderful couple of days where once the clouds cleared, the sun is just blasting off of the snow. I open up all the curtains, open up everything, and I let sunlight permeate the house. And if it's warm enough, I'll just go outside and stand in it. Every once in a while, we'll get a warm enough day where I can actually go out and like lay in the lounge chair and like I'm tanning myself, except in winter, because I have a little bit of enough of a cold tolerance to do that if I'm in sunlight. But that's a trick I do is anytime there's snow on the ground where you get that light bounce and it amplifies the sunlight.
That's a good one. And while we're still talking about the effect of sunlight specifically, I mean, I know one that I'm pretty positive you have used before or maybe still use, but is like red light therapy is a possible. If you can't get basically if you can't go find actual sunlight, if you can't get in it, there are we are in a time of society now and technology where you can actually go and in essence manufacture sunlight, which again it sounds weird but can actually help. And I mean, the idea of light therapy is again exposing your skin, exposing your eyes, all those things to different wavelengths of light, which we're supposed to get more of and don't necessarily get a lot. So
yeah. Well, and let's do the more accessible one first, because before red light therapy, sun lamps have been around longer than that.
There we go. I knew there was something else.
Yeah. So you can buy, if you go to Amazon, I think they're about like $20-$30 each. And you're supposed to kind of like have them on for X amount of time. I've never actually used one. It's one of the few things I've never used. But I have a lot of clients who use them. And one of the things that does seem accurate when I have people experiment with it is some people get a lot out of one lamp, and some people don't seem to get much. But one day it occurred to me because somebody said, "Yeah, I feel like I get something out of it, but it just really doesn't seem enough." And I said, "Well, these things are somewhat inexpensive. What if you just bought a second one and see if that and turning both on helps?" And for that particular individual, it did. But for some of them, it doesn't. So if you have the money laying around to do some experimentation, buy a sun lamp or 2 or 3 or 4, and experiment with if that can help you, because that's been, as far as I know, probably clinically proven. I've not bothered to look up the research on it, but certainly anecdotally, it works enough that I don't mind suggesting people try it out. But that one's much more accessible. Red light therapy, you have to have somewhere to go or buy one of the big panels. But it's another light substitute.
Say, like, I mean, like I said, we are still talking about money, and we're definitely aware of that. But there is, those are also getting more accessible in terms of payment. Like, you can get personalized red light ones for, I haven't looked in a year or two, but I do remember seeing them for like $150, that type of thing.
Okay.
Where it's it's basically like literally enough of a panel to put on a desk type of thing. So if you're if you're talking one person, something like that can help. So again, they're out there.
Yeah, and one of the things that I often ask people to think about, because some people will be a little price sensitive, and reasonably so, but
Yeah.
some people will be price sensitive when it doesn't make sense to be. And so if I'm thinking about buying a thing and imagining like, okay, this could give me a 20% boost through the winter months, I make sure to ask myself the question, like, would I pay $150 for my life to be 20% better for 4 months? Well, yeah, I'll find 150 bucks.
Right.
I'll go work at Sheets a few weeks to get 150 bucks
Yeah.
to do that.
Um,
Um, so yeah, but the red light therapy for me, because I have tried it and it had mixed results. It was like good, but I don't know. It felt really weird because in the beginning it was good. Because last year, to share my own red light therapy experiment, I only tried it for the first time last year, and I uh, did this thing where is really huge absorption, like big panel in the front, big panel in the back. If
yeah.
you're in Morgantown, they do it over at Move Right. That's where I did it. And for a few months, it was good, but there at the end, it was. And I know you're enough of a Tolkien nerd, you'll appreciate me using a reference here. Uh, you know that line where Bilbo's talking about like feeling like thin and stretched?
Yes.
Like towards the end, I kind of started to feel that way. Like it kind of felt weird. Because and I was doing it 3 or 4 days a week because they had this package where you could just go as much as you wanted.
Right.
So I was doing it 3 and 4 days a week, and there's towards the end I felt a little odd. Uh, and so I have a new hypothesis. So I'm trying a new experiment this year. I'll let you. I'll try to remember to update y'all on like uh, how well it works. Is this my new hypothesis? Well, okay, maybe I was doing it too much. Maybe my body does need to enter like some sort of hibernation phase because we're somewhat designed for our environment. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let November and December pass, and I'm not going to start any light therapy until mid-January. And then I'm going to start light
Okay.
therapy. And so I'm going to let my body like enter a little hibernation, but see what happens if I just cut it short.
I like that self-experimentation. Yeah.
Yeah.
While we are like, on the topic of some ways that can like cost a little bit of money, but for people who are okay with it or like willing to look at it, like what have you found in terms of people taking like trips or vacations in the middle of the winter months? Like is that
If you can do that, if you can just like go to somewhere sunny for 4 months and work remotely, like
yeah. Well,
if
yeah.
you got the
I mean,
if
like I
you
don't
got the bank to do that, what are we even talking about here?
yeah, I mean, yeah, like if we're not like I don't even mean that, but like in terms of people who seem to be like really affected by whether it's the lack of sunlight or the cold or whatever, if they take, even like a long weekend and are if they're able to and they take even a long weekend somewhere sunny, have you like do you have enough experience to know like how much that of an effect that of a positive effect that may actually have on them, or is it pretty short lived when you kind of get back to normal?
So it's fairly individualized. Some people can get positive effects for that last for a little bit. So that whole like super absorption of sunlight from the snow thing, that I run off of that for 4 days past when it's ended. Same thing. I've had people like go to a sunny vacation and they'll seem better for a week. But then I'll have people do the exact same thing, and they'll come back and they'll basically be just as like low energy as they were when they left, and it literally only lasts for when they are for when they're there. And that's why this is so individualized,
Right.
and why it requires so much experimentation to see what works for you.
I do remember a point actually earlier this year, and it was in the winter, and went on Disney trip. And it was the first time I'd been to Disney since I was like 5 years old, something like that. And I went and it was, for me, it was a short one. Like it was a go down on Friday, come back on Monday to get to work. And I remember landing, came back, landed. I am a shorts and t-shirt guy very frequently in the winter. So I had that on. I had like my like Disney style like Western hat, and came back, and there was snow in the car, and I instantly got in the car and instantly drove to a high school workout, and to a high school workout down in one of the high schools, and did the workout like in my Disney hat, like in the snow. But it was
I hope it was one of those mouse ear hats like that. That's what
it
I'm
wasn't. It
envisioning.
had the Disney like logo in the front there, but it was like a straw hat. But
Okay,
nevertheless, it was like,
that's good enough. I'm
you can
good with
still tell
that.
like this dude just rolled out of like it's like literally rolled out of Florida 2 hours later, basically, or something like that, in a high school in the snow doing the workout. And I was pumped and jazzed, but I mean that could also just be the energy of the day, having to making sure that I even got there in time. But anyway, so what are some of the other neurochemical things you found when it comes to people? So everything we talked about so far has been exclusively just sunlight exposure or vitamin D.
Well, and so that's 80% of it. Some people take a vitamin D supplement. Like if you Google seasonal affective disorder and how to treat it, like that's going to be number 2 or 3 in what to do. I personally have never noticed a great deal of impact on myself from that, but there are some of my clients who swear by it, so clearly it works for them. Uh, but realistically, the light therapy and the seasonal or the vitamin D, and then of course, it comes up a lot, but exercising helps a lot, not because it impacts the direct neurochemistry that comes up with seasonal affective disorder. It doesn't balance out the lack of sunlight, but what it does is you get the mood balancing effects of the serotonin and the brain derived neurotrophic
Mm-hmm.
factor and the temporary effects of the endorphins. So while it's not like a primary treatment, it's a decent secondary treatment to make sure you're getting some kind of exercise. Uh, that's the other major neurochemical way to deal with it. And this, I guess maybe not. Like this one is also a little iffy. And I really don't know if there's any research on this, but I'm just reporting what my clients report. It seems like that people who allow themselves to not be super strict on dietary restrictions, especially caloric deficit stuff, like having the allowing for the extra caloric overload throughout the winter months seems to be helpful to some people. My assumption being that being in caloric deficit is just stressful on the body, and it's just exacerbating the other problems with seasonal affective disorder and any other disorders that are present. But I've not read any research on that, so that's literally just a hypothesis that I carry around.
Right. I was actually just having that conversation with a mom 2 or 3 days ago tops, and I feel like in that case, it was pretty direct to what you're talking about, in the sense. Now, I was talking about her at like her son daughters, athletes, just athletes in general. I was asking how much, like, with their fall season over in this case. I was asking like what exactly, if anything, they had to do competitively coming up in the next couple of months. Like, fall sports may have indoor variations coming up now, etc. And where I was going with that in that conversation was that, like, I felt like this would be a good time to let their like high school athlete, or encourage them to gain a little bit of weight. Um, Not because they need to get bigger, not that type of thing, but they're in a sport where like they keep their body weight pretty low, and like they expend tons of energy. And because I remember how this even started. It started with her saying, like, yeah, like they like can't stop eating all of a sudden since season's over. And they're like, I don't know if they're going through a growth spurt again or what. And I was like, I mean, that's always a possibility in that age range. Could be. That could definitely be part of it. But I was like, like the body does have a tendency where it will try to recover, not just in terms of like from yesterday's workout, from today's workout. It doesn't just think that's small. It'll try to recover itself from 3-4 month like periods of intensity. So I was like,
Mhm.
it's probably trying to feed itself back from that. And that is why, like, a lot of athletes, like, most sports, if like, I almost wanted to say all sports, but that's just technically not quite true. But most sports, you will lose weight during the season unless
Mhm.
you're really trying not to. Like it is just that's just the way that like it tries to take you. Like tries to take you. So especially if they're pretty long ones and it's kept pretty low, getting that period of bounce back can be helpful. Now I do think so that's one side. I do feel like there's actually just and kind of like you said, this is more anecdotal and from decades of picking this type of stuff up than any research based. But I am a believer that the body is almost made to have those swings up and down, just not yo-yo style, nothing, not
Yeah.
absurd, not intensity. But so even on the other side of things, where this is a period like if you for whatever reason tend to like you eat a lot, you're very like regimented, all that stuff. This might be a good time frame to almost cut down on some eating times. Because naturally meaning historically, like go back before, like, this was a more famine type time, a natural famine, not as much food, or it might be harder to get food. So we ate a little bit more in the feast famine type of pattern at this point.
Mhm.
So like this could be a good period. Like, if you don't have other energy needs, this could be a good time frame to almost experiment a little bit with cutting food out a little bit and see if that helps. Like almost doing a little, maybe almost doing a little intermittent fasting at this point in time. And this isn't even like me saying intermittent fasting is the answer. This is just again like throwing out ideas for that self experimentation, because those type of things are so good at resetting our chemicals and like stuff like that, like you're saying.
Mhm.
I want to show this here. I don't know if it pops up on your screen, but comment actually from Owen Schmidt. If you remember Owen from WVU football, but
Yeah, from ages ago.
yeah, from his Seattle Seahawks days. This is awesome. But he says playing in Seattle, where you deal with low light overcast, vitamin D drops helped, in my opinion. He mentions that never experimented with.
Oh, I've never tried the sublingual drops. I've only tried the pills. I forgot you could get the liquid.
Oh, yeah, like I didn't think about that at all. Like I was, or even earlier in my head when I was thinking about like supplemental style vitamins, minerals, I was just thinking, your classic hard, chalky pill, like or something like that. Like I forgot about you could have drops. So
Mhm.
there's somebody who's experienced it. He says he felt like that part helped right there. Because it makes a big difference. I said people forget how.
Well, yeah, and the Pacific Northwest is actually like really bad for exactly this because, like you said, it's just overcast all the time during the winter.
Yeah. Um, so kind of like, closing, like while we get close to closing, I'm curious, like, have you found or ever encountered anybody, you know, where they've used other senses to help them with this? And ironically, it's the Pacific Northwest comment that made me wonder it. Like if you're if you're like at the Pacific and you have the ability to say, go to the ocean's freezing at that point, but nevertheless, for example, being able to like smell ocean water or something like that, or just people in essential oils, aromatherapy. Like, have you do you know much or anybody who people like say where they've used those methods to help them through this time a little?
So I can't recall anybody saying that, but the thing you're proposing has some interesting possibilities. So for people who are going to try their own self experimentation, this is actually a good idea Jerry's proposing. Uh, so the thing about those kind of things is like I don't end up recommending them very much because of course I'm treating like trauma and stuff, and you
Mhm.
can't really use like essential oil therapy to like treat deep seated trauma, or at least it's not yet been clinically proven to be able to. You can't do it through like some of the lighter type of behavioral therapies, but seasonal affective disorder is light enough on the brain that you might be able to do that. I would, matter of fact, uh, I would say I'll probably increase my use of essential oils in the winter months, and I was not specifically thinking about that, but I do seem to do that. So I might be instinctively doing exactly what you're proposing. The thing you said about the ocean, one of the things if you know that something has positive associations for you, then deliberately provoking that can help a lot. Another thing that talking about self-experimentation, the type of music I listen to in the winter actually changes. I notice that I very much prefer heavier, like metal type stuff in the winter. That makes me feel better than listening to it in the summer. Summer, it's all about like 80s hair metal. And then like
I know exactly what you mean.
yeah, and then in the winter it's power metal. Why? I don't know, but that does seem to work. And it's just through self-experimentation. Um, if you want to try sound therapy, this is not a bad idea. This is not a bad time to try. If you don't know what it is, there's a thing called binaural beats, and they play it. You have to do it with headphones on, so that you get the full effect, and stereo headphones, because sometimes one sound going in one ear is different than the sound going in the other ear. But they do produce marked physical and emotional effects. So this is a good time to experiment with that, because again, it's not going to treat your depression, but seasonal affective disorder is light enough that it can help a lot with those kind of things. So yeah, what you're proposing, while I don't have a ton of people report on it, and therefore I don't have any successes or failures to report, if somebody said, "Hey, I'm going to try this and I think it could work," I'd be like, "Dude, go for it, because that has some chance of working."
Very cool. So, all right, man. I think we're in a good place for your summary.
I have to do it. So to kind of wrap it up, if you're going to try and help yourself with seasonal affective disorder, view it in two ways: neurochemical, which is where you have your light therapies, your supplements, your exercise, or actually, yeah, your exercise, and any of these other little things that we just talked about 2 minutes ago. But then make sure to not neglect the behavioral side of it, meeting your psychological needs. If in the winter months you get less social interaction, try and get as much as you do in the spring and summer months. If you have lost your usual hobby, try and replace it with something that triggers the same things in your brain, because a lot of people treat the chemical side but don't get the full effect, because they actually also need to treat the behavioral side. And don't forget that if seasonal affective disorder hits you hard, you're going to manage it. You're not going to cure it, or at least if there's a cure for it, I haven't found it, and I've been working on it for a while. So if you happen to find an absolute cure for yours, drop it in the comments, because I would love to know what you did.
Awesome. So yeah, so great talking with you, brother. I think this one's such a common theme, and so there's just so many different ways to experiment to make it better.
And so many people have this. So many.
Exactly. Owen, still there? Catch it up. Appreciate you jumping in on that, man. Great to hear that from someone like you, and always hearing about how it's going. So yeah, man, I think it's gonna be good. So if you're watching this, hope you get something out of this. Feel free to share it, give it comments, engage with it, things like that. And we'll be back here in a couple of weeks. Like currently, we are still slated. We'll be back on Black Friday.
It's gonna be awesome.
So yep. So happy holidays, everybody. That's when you're catching this. We'll see you later.
Yeah.